I think my high school literature teacher might have been a communist. She might have been an atheist or an anarchist. She was certainly a philosophical gadfly. She seemed innocent enough at the time, but at some point she had us read portions of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, that poem by mid-19th century humanist who, while embracing all religions, didn't believe in any of them. Probably gay, certainly uninhibited man who just dropped ideas on the American public intended to free them from being controlled by religious doctrine, financial exploitation, or dominance by an educated elite. He invited his American peers to fall in love with animals, to find God in nature, and to have the courage to despise the rich and the powerful. He asked us to question everything we had ever been told, either in church or in school or read in a book. And he insisted that no one is so humble that they should either be forced to doff their hat or to bow to the wisdom and power of anyone else, an individual, a government, or a mob. Now, that Mrs. Hahn would just drop a piece of literature like this in a rural Kentucky classroom and then not comment on it must have been at least subversive. And I think I like her more now that I'm smart enough to cherish what she did back then. Still, without any commentary, this poem was able to just slide right across the clean wax floor of my young brain without leaving any muddy footprints. I could read the words, I could even memorize and repeat them, but I was powerless at that time to see what the implications were. America, it seems to me, has always suffered from a deep divide between the idealism we claim to cherish and the reality for which we seem all too willing to settle. We sing songs to liberty about the concepts of equality, freedom, opportunity, but in spite of those noble values, it doesn't seem to take very much to scare us, make us act like sheep. You know, I hope you know, if you don't know, let me say it very plainly, and I hope you'll remember. The root of virtually all anger is fear. I was brought up by a very angry father, and I was taught as a child to believe that anger was masculinity and strength. But the truth is that in almost every case, anger is rooted in fear. It's from being scared. If you refuse to be frightened, you don't have to be angry. Anger is almost always inspired by insecurity and fear. This is nowhere more true than in angry political rhetoric, especially what you hear in a presidential election year. Politicians use fear to get people to give up their rights, Amen. To convince them to abandon their freedoms, to sacrifice their liberty in order to feel a little more safe. When someone identifies themselves as being a law and order candidate, you can take it to the bank that they are trying to scare you enough to get you to appoint them as tyrant of your life. People will accept the rule of a tyrant only when they are afraid. So the news will feed us a steady stream of reports about the civil war in Syria, about ISIS, about a coup in Turkey, about a massacre in France, about the murder of police in Dallas. And I am concerned. There are good reasons to be concerned, especially over military unrest in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Turkey. But I want to pull out a couple of threads that the media tends to just blend in with all of these institutional and military events. There is a huge difference between an individual criminal and an army. There is a huge difference between an individual psycho or angry person and an institution like police forces across America. There's a vital distinction to be made between a single criminal or a small group of terrorists and a criminal institution or a criminal government. Now, Turkey has the second largest army in NATO, and the only way to ever have a bloodless coup is to make it very quick and totally successful, which has not happened in Turkey. I think maybe by this morning, Erdogan is claiming to have reclaimed control of Turkey. But if you have an army that big divided against itself, we can brace ourselves for some very horrifying news. And it's worth remembering that the United States has a military base there with nuclear weapons. But I want to separate that kind of thing from the horrible event that happened in France this week and the shooting of police in Dallas the week before. Both of these were events that appear to have been carried out by a single individual. Now, they may have had friends or people that encouraged them for whatever reason, but it appears that in both cases, this horrible event in Nice, in which more than 80 people were killed and unfortunately so many severely injured that the death toll is likely to go above 100, and the police shooting in Dallas, where 5 were killed and others severely injured, that these events were caused by individuals driven by their own demons of fear, maybe religious fervor, maybe not, maybe just rage at the injustice that they feel in life. But what it most certainly was not was Islam writ large. It was not Black Lives Matter with high-powered rifles. The fact that there are people who are so marginalized, whose souls have been so insulted, that they somatize their rage, they take their anger into their bodies in such a way that it comes out of them as mass murder. That's a complicated thing, and the only realistic way to address that is to make the world more fair, more just, more kind. And that this fellow in France was a French national, possibly born there. I don't know that they've got all those details yet, but he just happened to be a part of a marginalized community that if you've been in Western Europe, you recognize that while there can be all kinds of colors of people in England, that the white people are still at the top of the pile, and that opportunities for persons of color are much more rare. It's true in Denmark, it's true in France, it's true in other parts of Western Europe. And it's one way in which I can praise the United States, that I think we've done a better job of letting people assimilate and rise into positions with better opportunities than they have in much of Western Europe. I'm not going to defend the United States to the bone on that issue, because there's certainly still a tremendous amount of color restrictions and prejudice that go on in the United States. But even with more open borders in Western Europe, it doesn't appear to have equated into more open minds. But my fear is that in America, or in France, or in Belgium and elsewhere, is that fear that can be generated by just a single angry person or a small handful of organized terrorists can make people willing to give up their freedom, give up their liberty, their independence, to sacrifice their civil rights. Because if you don't defend those things, there are always powerful institutions that are willing to take them from you. With your permission, I'd like to take a few minutes to consider a single incident in our recent news cycle that illustrates my concerns. This is Alton Sterling. Like a lot of us, Alton Sterling was not a saint. He had both good and bad qualities, but he entered into the news cycle on Tuesday, July 5th, when he was shot and killed by police in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And you will have seen at least one video that shows Alton Sterling lying on the ground, being held down by 2 officers, and then he was shot several times in the back and chest at point-blank range. Now, there are 3 extant videos of this killing. There should have been 5, because both of those police officers were wearing video cameras on their uniform. Ironically, they both fell off just before they attacked Alton Sterling, which seems to be happening more and more often in police forces where the police are required to wear body cameras and then they just happen to not be working when they are doing something like this. The officers claim that they fell off. I don't know about you. I don't want to tell you how to feel about that, but I think they're lying. That's just how I feel. There was also a video made by the security camera at the convenience store where Sterling was killed. The store owner, Abdullah Mufali, was a friend of Sterling. Now, he also, when he saw this fracas beginning, he went outside the store and videoed the event on his phone. And there was another bystander in the parking lot, an unidentified woman, who also shot a video on her phone. I will not show you Abdullah's video because it is simply too graphic to see in church. Abdullah has said that he has no idea why the police attacked Sterling in the first place, and that during the time that they were throwing him up against a parked car and then slamming to the ground, he heard Sterling crying out, "What did I do? Why are you doing this?" And then he started filming just in time to see them shoot him. When the police became aware that Abdullah had witnessed these events, they handcuffed him and put him in the back of a squad car for hours, refusing to even allow him to go to the restroom. While they had him restrained, they asked if they could go in and make a copy of his store's video security recording, and he told them no. And they said, "We'll just go get a search warrant." And he said, "Go get a search warrant, but you cannot have it." They didn't go get a search warrant, but they went in and did not make a copy of the recording. They took his camera and the recording equipment and took it with them. He demanded that they not enter his store without him being present, but they kept him locked in the police car while they stole his video equipment. He was not permitted to call his family. He was not permitted to call a lawyer. Abdullah has speculated that they didn't know that he had recorded it on his phone, or they wouldn't have given him his phone back when they eventually released him without charging him, without arresting him, without processing him, or giving him any explanation for why he was illegally imprisoned for several hours. The other video that you may have seen was captured on the phone of a woman in the parking lot who sent it to a friend who sent it to Chris DeLay. Now, Chris has a popular social media presence. He's a musician in Atlanta, a veteran, an Air Force veteran, who works on the Dobbins Air Force Base in the Atlanta area. The day after he posted the video of the killing of Sterling, he went to work at Dobbins Air Force Base, was detained at the entry, and he saw police gathering all around. Sheriff's Department, military police, completely surrounded the building where he was detained. They handcuffed him and manacled him on his legs, just like slaves. They told him that he was being arrested on an assault and battery charge. In the end, they admitted that there was no assault and battery charge. They were able to find that he had some traffic tickets he hadn't paid. And once he pulled together the money to pay those tickets, he was released from prison. There is, of course, no precedent for going on a military base and arresting someone for having unpaid traffic fines. What I'm saying here is that even in the face of regular news of police killing of unarmed black men in our country, that the only real prosecution seems to be prosecution coming down on the witnesses and the protesters. Even going 1,000 miles away to harass a man who had the temerity to simply post an eyewitness video of a police killing. Now, I do want to take the time to show you a couple of minutes of a video, and my apologies to our iTunes listeners. There's no way for me to help you on a podcast with that. But if you go on YouTube and just look up the Young Turks and Louisiana or Baton Rouge riot police, you can probably find this video. But I want you to see this video of riot police in Baton Rouge breaking up a protest of the Sterling killing so that you can see why I'm so concerned about the danger of American idealism.
Property. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Come on, Julia, let's go. Let's go. We gotta go, Liz. We gotta go. We gotta go. Hey.
There is good reason to believe that there was little or no reason for the police to have ever had any contact with Alton Sterling that day. There was clearly no legal justification for arresting or harassing Chris Leday or Abdullah Mufali. And there was no legal justification for simply stealing his store's security camera. But these are all aspects of what we just saw in this video of a line of police, dozens of police in military garb, pushing American citizens who were simply expressing their First Amendment rights to protest wrongs onto private property, up onto a porch, and pushing against them to then accuse them of resisting the police and arresting them. This, men and women, is what a police state looks like. And if we let it happen with the tacit approval that comes from silence, if we are silent about this in Louisiana, then we can surely expect it in Missouri and Arkansas and Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas and Alabama and Georgia and Kentucky and Mississippi. And those of you that do not live in the South, never assume that cancer doesn't spread. But I will not leave you without a word of hope and encouragement. In fact, you've heard me say it before, but this time it's really different. I'm in love. And I can honestly say that I have never felt this way before, except maybe when I was talking about Malala. I'm in love with this young nurse in Baton Rouge, whom I've never met and will probably never meet, but if I knew where to send the flowers and jewelry, I know I would. Aisha Evans lives with her son in Pennsylvania, but she came down to Baton Rouge to participate in her first demonstration, and when she saw a protester being arrested for just being in the street, she decided that she would step out into the street and just stand there in silence. But what her silence is communicating is that she's not afraid. She stood there in silence, and riot guard police ran up to her and stared her in the face and didn't know what else to do but to arrest her. Now, we're going to see this picture for the rest of our lives. It's going to be featured alongside the picture of that man in China who stood before a tank in Tiananmen Square in 1989. And in fact, if any of you would like to make a gift to the church of a large framed poster of this, I would love to display it here, because this represents who we need to be. She says that God put her in that place to use her to bear witness to the fact that Black lives matter. Now, she may have a much more theistic view of God than I want to reflect, but for me, she represents what all of us who claim to be spiritual persons need to have in our bones: the willingness to stand up and refuse to be afraid. Because what those riot guard police are trying to say to us is that you don't have a right to protest. Now, they've killed about 1,000 people in the last year. The police have killed about 1,000 people, 300 of whom were unarmed. And at some point, we have to be able to say we have a right to speak, we have a right to protest, we have a right to demonstrate, but they will tell us you don't. And if you post video, they may come to where you work and chain you up and find something to charge you with. Men and women, do not give up on the idealism of our great nation. Don't trade your liberty or your freedom for anything, certainly not for a feeling of security or safety, not out of any sense of revenge, certainly not to defend your white privilege, and absolutely not to bolster the power of a tyrant. Love the earth and the animals. Go ahead and despise riches, but give alms to everyone that asks. Be willing to stand up for the crazy and the stupid. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants, but don't argue about God. Have patience and indulgence toward people, but don't take off your hat to anything known or unknown to any man or group of men. Go freely with the powerfully uneducated and with the young and with the mothers of families. Re-examine all you've been told in school or in church or read in a book. Dismiss whatever insults your soul, and your very flesh will be a great poem, and have the richest fluency, not only in words, but in silence. In the silence of lips and face, that between the lashes of your eyes and in every motion and every joint of your body.